Good morning, Mid-America Trucking Show. Thank you all for coming back for a third final day, and most importantly, for joining the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration for our session this morning. You are in for a real treat. Not only will you hear from FMCSA Administrator Derek Bars, but you'll also have a panel of our best subject matter experts and have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So to make sure that we have enough time for us to give you all updates and for you to engage, it's my honor to introduce FMCSA Administrator Derek D. Bars.
This does not, there we go. All right. Thank you all very much. It's good to be back here with you. I'm not going to regurgitate a bunch of stuff that we talked about yesterday because I see a lot of familiar faces that were in here yesterday. But again, I want to thank you all for the strong turnout that we've had here at Matt's and welcoming us from FMCSA as we walk around and answer your questions and try to be as accessible as possible to you all, and we're looking forward to this panel of folks that work with us every single day who are really driving the issues and the things that we have going on at FMCSA. Actually, I'm going to put this down. That we're moving things forward. As you know, I am Derek Bars, Administrator for FMCSA, and I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about how we got here and talk a little bit about what has got us to this point and what are our foundational settings that we have. The agency, of course, we had to reset. There was a time that we needed to actually bring back some common sense and start talking about things that we know that are really affecting the industry. We took a step back and asked ourselves some basic questions. What needs to change? You know, I'm all about change if you want to do change, but not doing it just because we're going to change. Let's just make sure that what we're changing actually is something that needs to be changed, and so we can get a better result from that. And that answer was pretty clear to us. We needed to strengthen the foundation. We needed to have we didn't need to be on sinking sand, as I would like to say. We need to actually have some concrete below us. And that meant cleaning up some outdated rules. You know, I think at any point in time in our organization, that if we took off 15 or 18 rules out of the regulatory requirements, that would be the biggest news of the day, or probably the biggest news of the year, to be honest with you. But it has not been. We've removed 12 rules. We've got more that are coming that we're actually going to be removing that are outdated, that are not applicable to the work that you're doing. I'll just give you one example that I like to give is a tag light. I'm not sure how many times a tag light actually caused a crash. But they end up on your CSA scores and make insurance go up and all this other kind of thing. It's just kind of a multiplying with that. So, you know, that being one, but there are more to come that we will be working through, and we have different sprints, is what we call it, that we're working to move out of the regulatory requirements. That I hope at the end of the day will take some of those unnecessary burdens off of the industry. We're talking about modernizing our registration and other systems that we have in place. And to be honest with you, within FMCSA, we have a lot of different silos of information. If you were in here and talked to Ankur and Ken yesterday, you found out that we have so many silos with our information. They don't talk to one another. And so we're working really diligently to make sure that we can bring all these systems together so they can communicate. We can be more efficient in what we do. We've also seen stronger enforcement. We talked about in English language. You've seen the non-domiciled CDL rule, trying to close those gaps. We've also seen work in how we're going to work on our ELDs and our training provider registry. We talked about those yesterday. We've also seen how we're going to address fraud and clean up some of the chameleon carrier issues, but also the chameleon carriers, or I don't call them chameleon carriers, but chameleon ELDs that are out there. And these are not just isolated issues. I mean, they are prevalent over and over again. I look at here with Dale, for example, and some of the work that some of his team do across the country when they're trying to look at the number of DOT numbers that are at one location, you know, and that's just a recipe for fraud, and it takes the folks who are actually that are in this room who are trying to do the right thing. That keeps that level playing field not being there. So as we shift, and we know that we have to continue to build our foundation, and we have to make sure that we strengthen this, and so this is not just we'll just do it for now, and then later on it's all going to go to hell in a handbasket. So, at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we are building our foundation that can sustain long periods of time. We don't need rules that are going to be in place that, when Louis over here, I see him, he's going to say, what in the heck? Why don't you think about this? Or why don't you think about that? So I want to try to make sure that when we are developing and we're creating the rules that we've discussed that we have for our notice of proposed rulemakings that are going to go out, that we think about those things, not just about what's in front of us today, but how that potentially is going to affect 5, 10, 15 years down the road. I think that's very important for us. And so the day's conversation that we want to have with our group, I'm excited about having these folks come up here in just a few minutes, because again, we have to make sure that we're strong in what we're doing. It can't be just things that are on paper. And I want to talk about the work that we're doing across the country. We have a small but mighty team. I'll be honest with you, I'd love to have more. I'd love to have more folks that were out here being able to enforce and being strong in our enforcement to make sure that there is compliance, and that compliance and that enforcement is uniformed all across the country. That doesn't just mean in our investigations, that also means in enforcement on roadside. I've heard from so many people at this particular convention here of making sure that we have strong, consistent enforcement on roadside. It can't be selective. And again, I mentioned yesterday, it's not just the commercial vehicle enforcement side, but it also has to be the folks who are actually causing the crashes in and around the commercial vehicles. You're the ones, if you will, that folks want to come after, if you want to use that term. They think you got deep pockets. You're out here trying to make a living for your families. You're trying to do the right thing when you may not necessarily be the ones who are the causation of the crash, but you end up being the bad guy in the news media and on the billboards and all those type things. So I think that level playing field needs to be strengthened, but also have consistent enforcement from non-CMVs and also CMVs on our roadways. But we're also looking, again, we talked about flexibility, more clarity, more common sense. We have to make sure, that, again, that when we are creating rules at a Larry's shop and working with Michael, you're going to hear from them in a few minutes, that, again, I use that term, we have to be trooper-proof, we have to be clear, we have to make sure that we're concise in how we're actually writing the rules to make sure that everyone understands and they can apply that in their own areas of responsibility. We're investing heavily in identifying risk and trying to identify those quicker so we can take the appropriate action. And then also we'll be working on our crash causation factor programs, or helping us to better understand not just happen, but why. And again, not just because it has to do with commercial vehicles, but in and around that vehicle as well. So we're modernizing our registration system. We've talked about that. Identifying verifications early and building those tools to allow us to identify those bad actors and not allow them into the system, period, in the beginning. At the end of the day, all of this comes back to one thing: delivering real results that actually will save lives on our roadways. Not just to talk about it. It's easy to stand up here and just talk and talk and talk. I see this word pro-talks. But we have to deliver. At the end of the day, I can sit up here and say we're doing all these things and our team are doing these things, but if you can't see the results of the work that we're doing, then again, it's nothing but a bunch of jibber-jabber. And that is surely not what we want. That is not what I want. That is not what the Secretary wants. We want to see action that's actually going to save lives on our roadways, as I keep saying. So with that, I'm going to turn this over, and I want to bring our panel up, and I'm looking forward to their conversation and answering the question that we have. And we've got Michael Hampton, who's our Senior Policy Advisor. I'll have him to introduce himself in just a few minutes. We have Phil Thomas, our Associate Administrator for Safety. We have Larry Miner, who is Associate Administrator for policy, and Larry's been around since the dinosaurs came in, just to be honest with you. And then we got Dave Satula, who is our administrator for research. But before we get started, I do need to have Ty stand up here for us, if he doesn't mind. He said, did he leave already? No, he didn't. I see him out there. So he was in D.C. the other day, I think, well, but not the other day, but back in September, and said that he wanted to get a hug from Larry Minor. And I want to make sure that you have that opportunity, Ty, that you can come up on stage and you can hug Larry Minor right here in front of everybody, okay? And if you said it was going to take the whole room to get you up here, but we want to see you come up here and hug Larry Minor. He's a legend. I just want you to know you have the opportunity of a lifetime right here, and you have turned it down, my friend. You have turned it down. But Louis, if you want to come up and hug Larry, you can do that too now. Yeah. All right. Well, Larry, thanks for being a good sport about that and willing to actually, hug the man up here. That lets you know. That goes back to the foundation that I'm talking about right here. All right, let's get started. All right, I'm gonna turn that on. All right. So if we can, let's. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about the office that you. If I don't fall here, if you could talk to us a little bit about what you do at FMCSA first, and then we'll hop into the questions that we have. But I'll start off with Dave, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then the Office of Research.
Sure. So I started federal service in 2005, worked for NHTSA for 17 years or so on vehicle technologies and safety technologies and incorporating those and codifying those into regulations for vehicles being built. Spent a lot of that time on things like motor coaches, seat belts on motor coaches, fire safety on large vehicles, lighting systems, did a little bit of international work for them, and then moved up to FMCSA in 2022. I had a great relationship working with them over the years on the motor coach issues and trucking issues. So knew a few of the folks involved, including Larry, so I got to hug Larry on a daily basis now.
There you go.
And so I am acting. I actually work for Larry in my day job, but I am the acting associate administrator for research and registration while we are in the process of figuring out who's going to take over that role for the long term. But thoroughly enjoying it, by the way. So on the registration side, we would run all of the data programs and information programs for registering vehicles, carriers, truckers, insurance companies, brokers, freight forwarders, whatever, and making sure that the right information is getting to the right places, as well as working with our state partners and federal partners on collecting crash data, stuff like that. On the research side, we take all of that information and apply it to making the roadways safer for everyone.
Thank you, Dave. Larry?
Good morning, everyone. I started my federal career back in 1989 under FHWA's Office of Motor Carriers, so that was way back in the day. And my office is responsible for doing rulemakings, looking at petitions for rulemaking from the industry, the state associations, or other groups, and evaluating applications for exemptions. So we stay pretty doggone busy and supporting the goals of the agency in modernizing our regulations, streamlining our regulations, getting rid of the things that just don't make sense anymore. So I've been around for a number of years and have enjoyed all of it. And I had the pleasure of first meeting Todd Spencer at a CVSA vehicle committee that I started attending back in 1991 or so. So I've had a chance to work side by side with Todd, and also being the federal designated official for our Motor Carrier Safety Advisory Committee, which includes representation from the industry, giving the agency advice on how we can improve our programs. So good to be here.
Thank you, Larry. Phil?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Philip Thomas. I'm actually the Deputy Associate Administrator for the Office of Safety. Started my career with FMCSA as an investigator out in the field and have worked my way up to headquarters over the last decade and a half or so. In the Office of Safety, we really kind of have three facets that we perform. One on the compliance and enforcement side, so things like SMS is in that shop, enforcement, hazmat, passenger, household goods, all of that. Tom Liberatory, who was here yesterday, you may have heard he runs that office for us. Then we have a safety program side where things like grants to our state partners, CDL, Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse, and our National Training Center fall. The third arm is field operations, so we have a staff in all 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico, all performing outreach, enforcement, and other commercial vehicle safety activities. So all of that kind of flows up through the Office of Safety, and we work with our friends here in policy and research to implement the regulations.
Thank you, Phil. And Michael?
So, good morning, everyone. Michael Hampton, a senior policy advisor, which can be often interpreted as a bit of a vague title, and I joke that it's other duties as assigned, but I work with all of the folks here on the stage and with a special emphasis on the priorities for both the secretary and the administrator when they put forth those priorities. And I advise on the policies, work with the rulemakings, as well as the different policies and procedures that come out of the safety office.
All right, thank you very much. All right, well, let's just hop right in and let's ask a few questions here for the audience. And I know we'll turn it over to you all to ask some in a few minutes. I know we're competing with the truck show next door, but if they knew all the great things that were happening over here, they'd be over here. Especially if they knew Ty was going to get a hug and so forth. They'd all been over here watching that, I'll tell you. But anyway, so I want to start off with Michael. Michael works in our front office with us every single day, and he's been with the administration in, I think, February of last year. Has really been just a stronghold in our office, and I can't thank him enough for the work that he's done to move FMCSA in the direction that we're in right now. But Michael, if I could, we've described 2025 as a foundational setting year for FMCSA, focused on resetting expectations and strengthening the integrity of our entire system that we have. But from your perspective, starting from day one with the administration for the most part, what were the most important elements we put in place, and how do they position us to drive stronger safety outcomes moving forward in the next couple of years?
Sure. So I would start out with the President's executive order. That came out at the end of April of last year, and I think that provided a shot in the arm and a direction for FMCSA. And there were three sections to that. So the first one, as everyone knows, it was the English language proficiency, to restore that as an out-of-service condition. So prior, it was just a slap on the wrist, and now, very quickly, we ensured that it was going to be an out-of-service condition. And since June 25th, up through a couple weeks ago, there have been about 17,000 drivers that were placed out of service. And those were 17,000 drivers that were on our roads, that were driving next to your family and mine, next to your trucks, and in our markets. And now they're no longer in service, which is great. And I think that shows that common sense is back on the table here at FMCSA. The next provision of that executive order was to restore integrity to the licenses, and it had a specific emphasis on non-domiciled CDLs. It directed FMCSA to conduct an audit and look at the potential systemic issues with non-domiciled CDLs. And so the Secretary announced a nationwide audit of non-domiciled CDLs, and what we found was shocking. Maybe not to all of you, but it was to us. We found systemic noncompliance in more than 30 states around the country, and not the same issues in every state. Every state seemed to be issuing licenses by their own rules. That's not how it was supposed to be. There's supposed to be one standard. And so when someone is issued a CDL in one state, and they can drive to any other state. So it has to be issued against the same standard. And what we found was systemic noncompliance across the state. So as FMCSA has taken an enforcement action against 25 different states, we found issues as substantial as 50% of licensed non-domiciled CDLs in New York, 1 in 4 in California, and about 20% in Illinois. And so we have, since then, that got us to the non-domiciled CDL IFR, and then as well as the final rule that came out in February and became effective on March 16th. And then the third provision of that executive order was the president gave us a very strong directive to improve working conditions for truckers. So he recognized that truckers are America's truckers are foundational to the American economy and for national security. And so at the end of June, we rolled out the Pro Trucker package, which included about $300 million for truck parking, and as well as updates to the National Consumer Complaint Database, which includes additional complaints for entry-level driver training providers and brokers. We withdrew the speed limiter rulemaking, and that was because we knew that it wasn't government that should tell you how to drive your truck. We wanted to give you control back to that, and we wanted to send a very strong signal that that's not what we were about. As well as we announced some hours of service pilots. And the hours of service pilots were the intent behind those were to say, and I do believe this, is that if we give truckers greater control over their schedules, greater flexibility, then that will lead to greater safety outcomes. I do need the data to prove it, to make that change. So that's why we initiated those 2 pilot studies. And they're going to be pretty expansive pilots. And we just recruited for the pre-test. But I do encourage you, if you are from a split duty or a split sleeper, if you are interested in joining that pilot, go to our booth, scan the QR code, and you'll be the first to know when we open that up. And so we want a lot of drivers to be able to participate in those pilots. Along with a few other provisions in the Pro Trucker package, that has, from the administration, from the White House to the Secretary to FMCSA, it had set us up on a very strong trajectory forward. And then when Administrator Bars came in, it provided us even more wind in our sails, in which we were able to start doing entry-level driver training audits and expand to, we had boots on the ground in all 50 states, looking at 1,500 training providers. And I think what you've seen is this reset, that there had been, prior to this administration, prior to this past year, there had been some less of an emphasis on, I'll just say it allowed for a proliferation of fraud and noncompliance, which allowed for people to compete against all the people that are trying to do the right thing at a different standard. When they're not following the rules, when they're not following the regulations, they're able to run costs at a much lower rate than the people who are following the rules and following the regulations. So we recognize that, we see that, and we're trying to fix that. And I think that's the direction we have going forward.
Thank you, Michael. Great job. Man, getting claps. That's all right. All right, Phil, it's your turn now. So let's talk about some enforcement, consistency, and oversight in the direction that we're going from your shop. We've heard consistently from the industry that predictability and consistency in enforcement really matter. I talked about that just a few minutes ago. How are you strengthening oversight of our field teams and working with state partners to ensure that enforcement is applied fairly, consistently, and effectively all across the country? I know that's a big job, and the coordination efforts are massive. But talk to us a little bit about the things that you're doing in the Office of Safety related to that.
Sure. So as I previously mentioned, we've got 52 division offices across the country where we are responsible for making sure that everyone is doing things the same way across the country. We've tried in the past to stress consistency, making sure everyone did things the same way, but we got a memo from the Secretary's office kind of putting some accountability measures in place, and that really gave us the ammunition we needed to really roll out a more robust accountability program for our staff at FMCSA and our state partners. We put together training for our folks to make sure that they understand the regulations, our processes, our procedures, and they do it the same way across the country. At the same time, making sure that we give drivers and motor carriers due process, that you have the opportunity to have your say in the matter. When I was an investigator, if you got to the end of an investigation and it was a surprise surprise what the outcome was to the motor carrier, then you weren't doing your job. It should be a conversation between a motor carrier and us and a driver to make sure that everybody understands how we arrived at the place that we did. We also discuss things like making sure that proper credit is being given when corrective action has been taken, that our fines reflect that corrective action that's been taken by the motor carrier. So it's really about fairness. That's the top compliment that we will get from a motor carrier or a driver when we interface with them, either through an investigation or an inspection, is that you treated me fairly. Nobody's going to clap. Nobody's going to shake your hand. I don't get hugs like Larry does. But when I go talk to our investigators at the academy on the first day, the compliment that we are seeking is that you treated me fair. And so at the end of the day, we are putting in place a structure to make sure that we treat drivers and motor carriers fair. Enforcement is one of the ways that we drive down fatal crashes in the U.S., but it's got to be done in a fair and consistent manner. We also don't want to create negative case law when we do things improperly. So it's all about making sure that fairness is that ultimate goal that we're looking to achieve when we take enforcement against a driver or a motor carrier.
So with a follow-up with that, and I think that goes with the word that we hear internally is called legal sufficiency.
Yep.
And so there may be, and some folks in the room, we talk about enforcement. We had a period of time where we were working through our legal sufficiency and our training. We may have seen a dip of investigations, but that's making sure, and it goes back to what you just got through talking about. So can you touch a little bit on the legal sufficiency piece and what you can see moving forward after all the training that we've had and getting all of our staff on the same page and moving forward?
Yeah, certainly. So I think one of the frustrating parts about being an investigator is when you just don't have the evidence to prove counts. You know that something's happening. I'm sure you all as drivers and motor carriers know there are things that people are doing, but we just can't prove it. But we have to make sure that we have the evidence. It can't be circumstantial evidence. We have to do things properly. And so I think making sure from our standpoint that the cases that we are submitting are legally sufficient, that they're being reviewed by a supervisor, that they're being reviewed by our counsel's office to some extent, to make sure that when we do take action, we know that it's going to stick, that it's not going to come back on us, and those drivers and those bad motor carriers are not going to be allowed to continue to operate because we made a mistake. I will add that we also are working with our state partners on this same area. CVSA is rolling out training to them in the near future to make sure that they understand what our expectations are from a legal sufficiency standpoint. But at the end of the day, it's about making sure that we have the documentation to ensure that any action that we take will stick and that it doesn't get thrown out by a judge who may not quite understand what we're trying to do, that we've got all our bases covered.
Great. And with that, I don't want you to necessarily go into operational plans necessarily with this group, but I do want to talk a little bit about the fraud pieces that your team is working on, and I want you to kind of give just what you can, what we can talk about. We've got multiple operations that are occurring simultaneously right now with our investigators, high-risk carriers, just for example. But can you touch on just a little bit of that at a high level for this group to talk about the multiple operations that we do have going on to address a lot of the issues that we've heard from these partners here?
Yeah, absolutely. So high-risk carriers is certainly, one that we are working on tackling actively, just because of how our staff is dispersed and how motor carrier populations are dispersed across the country. If we really wanted to do it based on where people are, we'd have to put everybody in Texas and California. And then that brings all sorts of other challenges. So we've kind of taken a national model. Sometimes we tend to fall into our 52 individual silos and say, I'm gonna take care of my house and you worry about your house. Abandoning that attitude as an organization within the Office of Safety. We have taken a national approach to addressing high-risk motor carriers that will allow us to get to those most high-risk companies quicker than we have in the past. On the fraud front, looking at those carriers that are registering at UPS stores and USPSs, we know those companies exist. We know that there's one address in California that has 700 DOT numbers registered at it. We are actively looking at those companies and developing a plan and how we can either force them to update their information so we know where they actually are, or to put them out of service. I think at the end of the day, we've taken a much more aggressive approach to those carriers. Instead of just letting this risk exist, we're actively going to tackle it to make sure that we can get these carriers in compliance or out of the industry.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, we're taking that approach to be more proactive in that front, on those fronts, instead of being reactive and not waiting for a registration system, because we know that they are already in the system and we have to deal with the nonsense that has been occurring for us to move forward, and we can basically start all over with our registration system when we have it up and running full time. So, all right, Phil, thank you very much for that. Great job. Thank you. All right, that's your, there we go. All right. It's getting louder and louder, Larry. All right, so policy making and rule making, all the sausage making that occurs. And I'd say that one of the things I found out when I got to FMCSA, it's like, golly, this takes such a long time. But Larry, we've taken action to close gaps and strengthen standards. But we also know that there's a need for flexibility and clarity. But looking ahead, what should the industry expect from FMCSA in terms of policy and rulemaking, and how are we balancing safety from a practicality standpoint with your team?
I think one of the things that the industry can look forward to is us doing additional deregulatory sprint activities that you heard Michael talk about, the deregulatory sprints that we started last year, where we put out 2 final rules and 18 NPRMs. And then this year, just last month, putting out 12 final rules out of those 18 that we had started, and looking at the rest of those 6 to see what we can do, and looking at other areas. And one of the things that you saw with the fall, I guess it was technically the spring 2025 unified agenda that actually came out in the fall, you saw that we were taking a fresh new look at broker transparency. We had started rulemaking to try to respond to a petition from SBTC and OIDA, and under the new leadership team, taking a fresh new look at it, and we're going to go out with a supplemental notice of proposed rulemaking, meaning that it's a slight turn or twist on what we had originally proposed, but still trying to address the concerns raised by the industry. So looking at a much more responsive regulatory agenda where we're actually trying to address some common sense need for change and greater flexibility, and just doing things like that. And you also, when you look at that unified agenda, know that we're going to do something on a unified registration system, and that's a rulemaking that aligns with the things that you heard Ken Riddle talking about with MODIS and modernization of our IT system, and also finding ways to make sure that we get a handle on who's getting all these DOT numbers and what are the regulations that help us get a better handle on all these folks that are getting those DOT numbers. And you've heard the talk about ELD vendors and ELDT. So to the extent that we need to have regulatory changes to support the goal of the administrator in cleaning up the ELDT program and modernizing what we're doing with electronic logging devices, any regulatory actions that are necessary to help them out with that effort. No more claps and no more applause.
Yeah. So I want you to talk a little bit, though, so these folks can understand and educate them, like I had to be educated, about the process a little bit. And we have more than 9 or 10 rules for notice of proposed rulemaking that are going to go out. But they're actively working on these 9 or 10 that we have. And just talk a little bit about, normally it would take probably, a couple of years?
Yes, unfortunately.
And we don't have a couple of years to wait, and that's not acceptable. So, and with Wendy and your team, we're looking at hopefully, but these 9 or 10 notice of proposed rulemakings going out that you just talked about, hopefully, I tell her I like to have it out by the end of the summer. And I know that she's aggressively working on that. But can you just talk just a little bit about how we've been able to get additional resources in to be able to help the team move this faster and quicker?
I think one of the exciting things under the new leadership team is a greater emphasis on moving rulemakings forward in a more timely and efficient manner, that we're putting a lot more pressure on the teams to not just work harder, but to work smarter, and to the extent that we can make the rulemakings tighter so that you have a better idea that now that the NPRM is out on the street, what is it I'm trying to respond to? Because in the past, some of the rulemaking notices would be really, really, really long, really, really, really confusing, and it was tough for the industry to fully engage with us. But breaking it up into bite-sized chunks so that we can say, here's issues A, B, and C, here's what we want to change about it, and you can quickly give us your comments, and we can quickly turn it around and get out a final rule on A, B, and C. Now let's move along to D, E, and F. Here's some NPRMs on D, E, and F. Let's keep them tight, clean, and make them common sense and get to the point. You give us your feedback, we can address those comments and get it out. So increasing the tempo, moving a lot faster. We're not cutting any corners. We're satisfying all the legal requirements under the Administrative Procedure Act. We're satisfying all the legal requirements for making sure we give you all the facts and information about the topic, but presenting it in a way that's much more timely, much more efficient, moving at a faster pace, and hopefully getting those final rules out sooner so that you can actually see the results, that you gave us comments, you can see how we responded to your comments, and here is the final rule.
Great. Thank you, Larry. Appreciate that. All right, Dave. We're investing in better data. We're working with OSTR and your research team for a stronger research and modernizing our registration systems we talked about earlier to identify risk a little bit earlier and a lot earlier and to combat fraud. What are the next major steps in this area, and how will they translate into real-world improvements for drivers, trainers, and enforcement?
Sure. Well, thanks for letting me bat cleanup here.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can bring it all home. The first step for us is the introduction of MODIS. So that represents the most significant change in our registration system in at least the last 3 decades. We've had some minor changes to some of the registration systems, introductions of data programs like SafeSpect, but this is the first time we're really gathering all that into a single platform that makes it more efficient for the users. So drivers going in can easily find all their information. Brokers going in can find their information. Carriers can find what they need to do, and it will steer them in the path so they're not distracted with, well, what does this mean over here? It has nothing to do with your business. Let's just keep you on the track you need to be. So the introduction to MODIS is the first time we're bringing all that sort of into a one-stop shop. And it's providing greater security for all of that information, better visibility for that information, so it's more transparent. People can start using it in ways that help their business grow, help their business perform better, make it easier for them to comply with the regulations we put together, make it easier for them to travel down the roadway. So MODIS is basically laying that foundation for that work to start occurring. And it will provide us, again, that foundation to build that house even stronger so that we can start implementing tools down the road to even work more closely together to suss out some of the fraud and abuse that does occur in the system and get those bad actors off the road so that the good actors can continue to do their business, do it the right way, and keep progress moving forward. So that's going to be the first step in all of this. Secondly, we're working on our information systems like data queues. We're putting out a call for updates to that where we're hopefully going to, again, make that process more transparent so that the folks in the field can feel that they're getting their fair share out of it. They're getting better information out of the data queue system. They're able to address issues that they're experiencing in the field and make sure that the data coming in is accurate to the most degree and give them the ability to act on those issues where they do see them so that we're taking care of problems that occur, like if someone gets cited for a violation that doesn't belong, they've got an easier pathway to get that resolved and get their safer scores back to where they need to be or pull that information back off of what might be hurting them down the road. And likewise, it is going to be updating some of the processes to make sure that that system is not being abused or seeing any sort of fraudulent application of it. So we're embarking on that in the coming months. And then, as Michael suggested, we've got a ton of pilot programs and future research projects looking at things like the Crash Causal Factors program, where the data that comes in on all of our crashes is supplied by our state partners. We want to make sure it's accurate. We want better granularity on it so that we can identify where we should focus our efforts down the road and make sure that we're focusing on the right problems. We're not creating issues where suddenly we're implementing safety programs that just don't make sense on the road. We're also looking at truck parking, making sure that it's safe and reliable for the drivers on the road so that they don't have to worry. I'm getting next to the end of my hours of service. Do I need to start looking for parking now, or is there something available for me when I get closer to the end of that tour of duty? And then we're looking at the pilot programs. Again, stop by the booth and please sign up. It will help us identify the most useful paths for us to help provide some of that flexibility for the drivers out there and the carriers out there, so that if they're coming up into a roadway system that is congested and they're at a point where they have to make that decision, do I stop, do I go, it will help us identify if they can split that hours of service, or if they can split some sleeper berth time and get some rest effectively and safely. So in a way, what I love about this job is it's giving us the opportunity to develop and bring in all of that data and tighten up those loopholes in that safety net so that we can provide a safer environment for all of the actors involved, whether, again, it's the drivers, the carriers, the brokers, the insurance companies. Provide that flexibility and efficiency for the industry as a whole to grow and really prosper.
Right. I appreciate that. One thing I wanted to talk about with employees just a little bit as we're going through and doing research, rulemaking, enforcement, and even, again, from policy standpoint, from our front office, is for us to be engaged at every level as we can. And getting people who have not necessarily, and to be frank, may not have actually ever been around the trucking industry at all, but are actually writing rules, who are researching rules related to the trucking industry. And so our research, not our research team, but our policy team, we've encouraged them. I said, I want you to go out. I want you to, let's go to a location. I want you to see how the trucking industry works. I want you to see how enforcement works. I want you to see what the end result looks like of what you're actually writing and how you implement that. So Larry's team has gone out recently and has done some of this on site, been to a trucking company. We're getting ready to plan a time for them to go to a weigh station and look at the enforcement side. Research the same way. We need to be engaged, involved at all levels of FMCSA. We can't just make decisions and we can't write rules, we can't enforce without understanding the whole totality of what's going on inside this industry. We can't be in a silo, we can't be in a box, and that's why I think it's so important for our folks to be sitting in the front seat of the cab of a truck, for example, and understand what a driver goes through, and I'm more than happy to have drivers to go, if we can, to go on investigations. I don't know how we'll do that, but but we'll figure it out, I guess. But the point is to have a better understanding of what everyone is doing. And I think it's incumbent on us to get out of the office, get out of that cubicle, get out of Washington, D.C., and to understand what is actually going on in this particular industry as we're writing and preparing the rules that we're talking about, the enforcement actions that we're implementing. So at the end of the day, as long as I'm here and we've got this great team here, that's what we plan to do, that's what we're going to do, to be able to help strengthen it up, but also understand one another better moving into the future. So thank you all very much for your time here this morning, and again, with your outreach, your education. But before we wrap up, I do want to open it up to any questions. You only get one. I'm just kidding. And I've got Bill over here. Bill, raise your hand. If you do have a question, he's got a microphone. If you will kind of line yourself up over here. Oh my gosh, now, Bill, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this, but okay, the whole room is on its way to Bill.
Thought we were going to save time by not having to have me run all over the room. All right.
All right.
I find very interesting what you say about them get out of the office.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a proposal. Send those guys over the road for a month.
Over the road
Once
for
a
a
year.
month? Man, I
Once a
can't,
year.
I promise you, I can't
They're
leave
gonna
them out
learn
for
a
a
lot.
month. but I
Okay,
would
let's
love
do a week.
Yeah, I would love to send them out for a few days, and we would have some plans to send some of them out for a trip or something like that,
I
absolutely.
have a lot of friends with trucks. We can host them for a week. Over the road, yeah?
Thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. Y'all get his name so we can, yeah. We're going to put somebody in the truck with him, all right? We're going to check your scores, though, to make sure that you're not out of service, though. Yes, sir, Dylan.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So my question is, everybody is talking about non-domicile. We have this burning question. We have this burning issue that how these licenses got issued, how these people, they got these licenses. But we're not talking about, there's a lot of people that they are good drivers in this group. Are we planning to do anything to get that group back? Because everybody from the mega carriers says that we have a driver shortage. I say that we never have a driver shortage. We have a shortage of good drivers. Mm-hmm. So we have a shortage of good drivers. So we are taking some good drivers out in this problem. So are we thinking of doing anything to bring those drivers back, or maybe retest them, maybe do something that where they can get back to the working force? Because I know within the next 6 months, this slogan is going to be coming back that we have a driver shortage, and then we're going to bend the same rules that we bent 5 years ago. Yeah. So are we going to do the same thing after 6 months? Are we going to stick to these rules? Or are we going to do something to bring those good drivers back?
Michael, why don't you start with that? How about that?
Sure. One, I want to first reject the idea of a driver shortage.
Amen.
Then two, when we did the non-domiciled CDL final rule that was issued in February, there were really two main reasons in which we did that rule. Number one, if someone, a U.S. citizen, goes into a DMV to get their CDL, they are going to have 10 years of background check in which they're going to look at their driver history. It's going to be drug and alcohol, reckless driving, crash involvement. If someone were to, I'm just going to speak candidly, if there was an individual who entered the country, received a defensive claim of asylum, received an employment authorization document, and 2 months after entering the country illegally is now holding a CDL, that individual, the DMV is unable to access that 10 years of driver history of DUIs, crash involvement, reckless driving, none of it. That created a bifurcated standard, two different sets of standards for individuals getting a CDL. FMCSA has a responsibility to ensure driver fitness, and we were unable to ensure driver fitness. We know driver history. If someone's involved in a crash, someone's had a DUI, there's a much greater likelihood of their crash involvement in the future. That's why it's evaluated. That's why it's in FMCSA's regulations. That's why it's in law that we evaluate driver history. That's critical. But the DMVs were unable to access foreign driving records. So it was two different sets of standards. So it was a safety gap, a safety loophole. The second is there was systemic noncompliance. So every year we do these annual program reviews, and there was a special emphasis based on the Secretary's directive of a nationwide non-domiciled CDL audit. There's a special emphasis on non-domiciled CDLs this year. And what we found was systemic non-compliance in more than 30 states. I mentioned this earlier, but FMCSA has to have uniform standards for CDLs. But states were issuing CDLs to different standards. That's unacceptable. And more importantly, there were when somebody gets a CDL, the weak link in that chain, with all respect to the DMV employees, the weak link in that chain is the individual at that front counter who has to review that immigration document or interpret it. What's a C08? What's a C33? What's a C14 on an employment authorization document? The individual who is trying to finish their day and get home to their spouse and their kid and their dog, that's who has to interpret that immigration document. And it was complex. And so what we did is we took a very complex standard and simplified it to ensure that all CDLs are compliantly issued and that everybody who gets a CDL is qualified and vetted to hold that CDL.
So I just want to ask you one more question, that if that is the way, why can't we go ahead and have a rule, process in the rulemaking that where a person who is coming to this country, doesn't matter which way they're coming in, they can't get the license for 2 years, 4 years, unless they build their record over here. Like, they won't get a house or a credit card until they build their credit. Why can't we have that in the policy, that the person who is walking into this country will not? And the one you're saying that, 2 months they get the work permit and within next month they get the CDL, they never drove a car in this country. They never did nothing in this country to be qualified for that. So overall, it's a mistake. It's a problem that was created by the DMVs or the government, but we're penalizing people right now by taking that away.
Well, no, I want to
There are some good people in there too.
Yeah, but I want to back up to your question that you're saying. You're right. The lack of an enforcement and lack of compliance created an issue that should not have ever been there in the first place. If it had been followed, we wouldn't have had this issue.
Exactly.
And I and our team are put in a position to be able to go against how you and I may believe in this particular issue. But if the rule had been followed to start off with, we wouldn't be having this conversation because they wouldn't have been issued the driver's license in the first place.
Exactly. We agree.
And so I'm here trying to solve an issue that we shouldn't even be having this conversation with in the first place, because number one, if you want to get a driver's license, there is a path to come through. It may be a complex path. I understand that. Don't get me wrong, okay? But I have my lane that I'm trying to work in here to try to make sure that we have the most safest drivers on the roadway. I don't really care where you come from. Honestly, I do not care.
Yes.
What I care about is the person that is sitting behind the wheel of that 80,000-pound vehicle. Number one, should you have actually been issued a driver's license in the first place? Exactly. And if you're here illegally and you can't get a driver's license, you don't comply. You do not get to sit behind the wheel of that truck.
Absolutely.
And you do not get to have, and listen, I'm not trying to get a clap here, to be honest with you, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to make sure that if I'm not going to compromise safety to put a butt in a seat. It's not going to happen.
Absolutely, and we totally agree with the safety, and I am for all safety. I'm in 30 years in trucking and doing it all in the right way.
Right.
And that is what we presented and we did in front of the previous administration, that not to do this, but it has been done.
Yeah.
So I absolutely agree with you and absolutely, for it.
Yes.
But again, my thing is that are we going to go ahead and go bend these rules again?
I'm not bending the rule. Somebody else might bend it, but I'm not bending it. How about that?
Thank you, sir.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Appreciate it.
Okay, so I am a woman in the industry. I'm usually the only one on the dock. Sometimes I'm the only one at the fuel bay. And I I don't disagree with anything that you've said or that you've put in place, but what I would like to see is some attention paid to workforce environment after we have our CDL and we're with our employer, because there's 3.5 million commercial motor vehicles out here. 3 million of us are company drivers, and we don't have a voice. So I want to tell you a quick story about a training environment for a company that I talked to recently. I talked to the director of training, and she said, you know, like, one of the pain points for us is having to share sleeper berth space, an 8 by 8 foot box, for weeks to months on time with our supervisor and supervised in the same space. And how do you make that a valuable learning experience and keep it professional all the time? Well, one of the ways they decided to do this, so they didn't have their supervisor and the supervised in the same sleeper berth space, for the 10-hour break, they took one person, let them have 5 hours in the sleeper berth, and then the other person had to do 5 hours in the chair up front, so they weren't in the same sleeper berth space, instead of stopping and getting a hotel and everybody getting a good 10-hour break in an appropriate space, right? And this was a woman that was talking to me. She was the director of training. She drank their Kool-Aid. And part of the problem that I see with bringing people and enticing them and saying, yes, this is a great place to work, is that you have these types of environments that are continued by the carriers. They're considered, Sheath said that their carrier was a feeder carrier. Well, feeder carriers should be held to the same standard and be a safe place of employment for me, whether I'm a man or a woman or, you know, whatever. And I don't see a lot of conversation about that happening at the federal level. And that has been my mission for the last 5 years, is to carry that conversation forward so that we can make this a better place for the next generation, and that it's safer and more professional, and everybody plays by the same standards.
Thank you for that. And what I will commit to you is, I know we talked yesterday and having that conversation. I'm happy to have my chief counsel, Rebecca Pettit, over here with us, and she is going to work. She and I have talked since yesterday of working closely with your group and others that are talking specifically about these issues. So we look forward to having those further conversations and bringing that up. Thank you very much.
Administrator, it looks like we're only going to have time for one more question.
Okay. And then what we'll do is the others, I see Tab back there. I haven't seen you in a long time, sir. So we'll make sure that our team stays, and we'll try to make sure that we answer your questions before you get out of here, okay? So we won't do it in this setting, but we'll stay here and answer your questions. Yes, ma'am.
In 2019, Real Women in Trucking delivered a petition that grew thousands of signatures in support of our request to the FMCSA during a listening session just like this. The ask was for immediate action, and we offered proposed solutions to address the sexual assault and harassment of entry-level driver training fleets in unsupervised cohabitation conditions of employment, just like Kelly Lynn was talking about.
Yeah.
We've asked every administrator since Ann Farrow, and while we have come close to getting some accountability, we are now back at square one. And it's our organization, Real Women in Trucking, that's taking the distress calls from these women. So I'm just wondering, how can we get this issue back on the radar of the FMCSA, because we don't have the funding to address, like we're trying to do, and help women that have suffered one of the most brutal assaults and humiliating instances in their lives, and we have nothing to do for them. We have no help from anyone.
I will commit to you that our team will have a conversation with you to address the concerns that you have. How about that? Is that fair? All right, thank you. Appreciate it. All right, I'm sorry that our time is ended. Thank you for the opportunity. The ones that have questions over here, our team will come down off the stage and we'll try to answer all of your questions that you have. So thank you all very much. God bless you and safe travels back home.